Japan just activated 8 weapon systems that make China's naval planners rethink their entire Taiwan strategy. Not upgrades, not modifications, brand new platforms that entered service in the last 18 months, while Beijing was focused on carrier groups and hypersonics. Here's the kicker. 6 of these systems exploit a vulnerability China didn't know it had until Japanese destroyers started appearing where they shouldn't be. This is how Japan turned its self-defense force into Asia's most unpredictable military power. For decades, China built its strategy around one assumption: Japan's military is constitutionally constrained, reactive, and designed purely for homeland defense. That assumption just collapsed. Between January 2024 and November 2025, Japan deployed capabilities that do 3 things China can't easily counter: operate in shallow littoral waters where carriers are vulnerable, strike from unexpected angles using platforms Beijing underestimated, and integrate allied systems faster than China can adapt its doctrine. The result? Japan now controls choke points in the East China Sea that were supposed to be under the PLA Navy's control. Here's the central question driving everything you're about to see. Can Japan's 8 new systems create enough strategic ambiguity to deter Chinese aggression without triggering the arms race spiral that leads to conflict? The players in this shift are clear. China operates the world's largest navy by hull count, over 370 ships, but most are optimized for open ocean carrier defense and Taiwan scenario. Japan fields only 54 major surface combatants, but they're now equipped with weapons designed specifically for the geography China must cross: narrow straits, contested islands, and shallow seas, where acoustic conditions favor diesel-electric submarines. And here's where it gets interesting. Japan didn't just buy new missiles. They restructured their entire operational concept around a principle called multi-domain deterrence. The idea that you don't need to match an adversary ship for ship if you can threaten them from sea, air, land, and cyber simultaneously. These 8 systems are the hardware that makes that theory real. Let's start underwater, because that's where Japan's most disruptive capability hides. The Taige-class attack submarine, Japan's first entirely new submarine design in 22 years, entered service in March 2024. On paper, it's a diesel-electric boat, which sounds old-fashioned compared to China's growing fleet of nuclear subs. But here's what the specs don't tell you. Taige uses lithium-ion batteries instead of traditional lead-acid. That gives it 3 times the underwater endurance of previous Japanese subs and the ability to sprint at high speed without surfacing. In the shallow, acoustically complex waters of the East China Sea, where sound bounces unpredictably off the continental shelf, that makes Taige almost impossible to track. Chinese sonar systems designed for deep Pacific hunting suddenly go blind. Japan operates these boats with a rotational crew system, 2 crews per hull, meaning they can stay on patrol 50% longer than comparable Chinese submarines. The result? At any given moment, 4 to 6 Taige-class boats can blockade the Miyako Strait, the narrow waterway Chinese carrier groups must transit to reach the Pacific, and China's surface fleet has no reliable way to clear them without risking multi-billion-dollar destroyers to torpedoes they never see coming. But here's the kicker. Taige isn't just a defensive weapon. It carries the Type 89 torpedo with a range of roughly 30 miles and active, passive homing that can reacquire targets even after evasive maneuver. Naval War College simulated Japanese submarine pickets operating in the Ryukyu Island chain forced Chinese carrier groups to reroute 200 miles south, adding days to any Taiwan response timeline. That's not sinking ships, that's controlling geography. Next, let's talk about what happens when those carrier groups try the southern route. Japan's Type 12 surface-to-ship missile, upgraded to the extended range variant in 2025, turns the Ryukyu Islands into a 900-mile anti-ship wall. Unlike older coastal defense missiles that sit in fixed installations, Type 12 launchers are truck-mounted and road-mobile. Japan deployed them across Okinawa, Miyako, and Ishigaki Islands starting in late 2024. Each launcher carries 6 missiles, with a range now exceeding 560 miles, enough to cover the entire East China Sea from Japanese territory. The missiles fly low, use terrain masking around island, and employ terminal pop-up maneuvers that make interception difficult even for advanced destroyers. Here's why this matters strategically. China's anti-access strategy relies on pushing U.S. carriers beyond the first island chain, using DF-21 and DF-26 ballistic missile. Japan just flipped that logic. Now Chinese carriers face the same dilemma: operate within 500 miles of Japanese islands and risk getting hit by truck-launched missiles they can't easily target, or stay farther east and lose their tactical advantage in any Taiwan scenario. The cost math is brutal. Each Type 12 missile costs roughly $1.5 million. A Chinese Type 055 destroyer costs $900 million. Japan can afford to fire 600 Type 12 missiles for the price of a single enemy capital ship. That's not attrition warfare. It's a cost imposition strategy, and it works because Japan controls the islands where the launchers hide. What happened next is even more surprising. In October 2025, Japan conducted a live-fire exercise where Type 12 missiles, coordinated with data from U.S. reconnaissance satellites and Australian P-8 patrol aircraft. The target, a decommissioned Japanese destroyer 400 miles offshore, was engaged by missiles launched from 3 separate islands, with targeting data shared in real time across Allied networks. All 6 missiles hit within a 90-second window. China watched that test. So did every navy in the Indo-Pacific. Now, let's shift to the air-sea interface, because Japan just solved a problem that's plagued every navy. How do you hunt submarines across thousands of square miles of ocean without bankrupting your defense budget? Japan's answer: upgrade 70 existing SH-60K helicopters to the SH-60 Leaders standard, turning them into networked submarine hunters that operate as a coordinated swarm rather than individual platforms. The upgrade includes new dipping sonar with 3 times the detection range, sonobuoy dispensers that create persistent acoustic grids, and data link systems that let helicopters share contact information instantly. Here's the tactical shift. Old doctrine sent helicopters to investigate sonar contacts one at a time, slow, predictable, and easy for submarines to evade. The SH-60 Leaders swarm doctrine drops 20 to 30 sonobuoys in a coordinated pattern, then uses multiple helicopters to triangulate contacts and prosecute targets simultaneously. In simulated scenarios, this approach reduced the time to localize a submarine from 45 minutes to under 8 minutes. Japan operates these helicopters from its fleet of Izumo-class helicopter destroyers and smaller destroyer escorts, giving them the ability to generate 24-hour anti-submarine coverage across the entire East China Sea. For China's growing submarine fleet, which includes 12 nuclear attack boats and over 50 diesel-electric submarines, this creates a lethal problem. Any planned submarine attempting to operate near Japanese waters now faces a 70-helicopter force that can coordinate, persist, and strike faster than Chinese subs can evade. But there's one problem nobody's talking about. This system only works if those helicopters can operate from ships, and China's anti-ship ballistic missiles now threaten Japanese surface vessels at ranges exceeding 1,000 miles. Which brings us to the next weapon, Japan's Maya-class destroyers, 2 in service as of mid-2025, with 2 more under construction, are the most advanced ballistic missile defense platforms in Asia, period. They carry the Aegis baseline J-7 system, SM-3 Block Tie-A interceptors capable of engaging ballistic missiles in space, and integrated fire control that can coordinate with U.S. and Allied ships in real time. Here's what makes Maya different from older Japanese Aegis destroyers. It's designed from the keel up for cooperative engagement. That means a Maya destroyer can launch interceptors based on targeting data from a U.S. E-2D Hawkeye aircraft or a South Korean destroyer 200 miles away without ever activating its own radar. For China, this creates an impossible targeting problem. You can't suppress Japanese missile defense without simultaneously engaging American and Allied sensors scattered across the Western Pacific. The SM-3 Block 2A interceptor itself is a monster. It can engage ballistic missiles at altitudes exceeding 500 miles, well into space, and has a demonstrated intercept range of over 1,350 miles. In a November 2024 test, a Japanese Maya destroyer intercepted a simulated ballistic missile target while operating in the Sea of Japan, using targeting data provided by a U.S. satellite. The intercept occurred 300 miles from the launch point, well before the target could threaten Japanese territory. This is where everything changed. By deploying Maya-class destroyers in a patrol box east of the Ryukyu Islands, Japan can now create a ballistic missile defense umbrella that covers Taiwan, Okinawa, and the southern Japanese home island simultaneously. Chinese DF-21 and DF-26 missiles aimed at U.S. bases in Japan or allied ships in the region now face a layered defense that includes 32 SM, 3 interceptors per destroyer, plus whatever the U.S. contribute. Suddenly, China's carrier-killer strategy requires firing salvos large enough to overwhelm dozens of interceptors, a much more expensive and uncertain proposition. Japan doesn't just defend anymore. In April 2025, the Japan Air Self-Defense Force integrated the Norwegian-designed Joint Strike Missile onto its F-35, a fighters, giving Japanese stealth aircraft a standoff weapon with a range exceeding 300 miles, and the ability to strike moving ships or coastal targets with minimal warning. Unlike traditional anti-ship missiles that fly straight and fast, JSM uses stealthy low-altitude flight, GPS, inertial navigation, and an imaging infrared seeker that can distinguish between ships in a formation. That means a Japanese F-35 can launch from Okinawa, stay outside the engagement envelope of Chinese destroyers, and selectively target high-value ships like amphibious assault vessels or command ships. The strategic implication is blunt. China's amphibious invasion fleet, the ships that would carry troops across the Taiwan Strait, is now vulnerable to precision strikes from Japanese territory. Even if Japan never crosses into Taiwan's air defense identification zone, Japanese F-35 second can orbit over the Miyako Strait, detect Chinese amphibious groups using onboard sensors, and engage them with JSM at ranges where Chinese fighters struggle to intercept. And here's the part that kept Chinese planners up at night. Japan operates 42 F-35 fighters as of late 2025, with orders for 105 more by 2032. Each aircraft can carry 2 JSMs internally without compromising stealth. That's 84 precision anti-ship missiles in the air simultaneously. If Japan commits its full fleet, a salvo large enough to threaten an entire amphibious task force. Missiles and submarines dominate headlines, but Japan's most underrated new capability is invisible. In 2024, Japan completed a nationwide integration of its air defense radar network, linking Patriot battery, Aegis destroyers, F-35 fighters, and ground-based early warning systems into a single fused picture that updates in real time. This isn't just better radar. It's a shift in how Japan defends airspace. Previously, each system operated semi-independently. Patriot batteries defended fixed sites, Aegis ships defended task forces, and fighters patrolled sectors. A Chinese cruise missile detected by a destroyer radar 200 miles offshore can be engaged by a Patriot battery on land or an F-35 inches the air, depending on which platform has the best shot. The technical backbone is Japan's automatic warning and control system, upgraded to a distributed architecture that doesn't rely on single command nodes. Even if China disables one radar site or command center, the network adapts and reroutes data through surviving nodes. In effect, Japan built an air defense system that's resilient to the opening salvo of a war, the attack phase, when China would try to blind Japanese sensors with cyber attacks and cruise missile. What they did next is even more surprising. Japan linked this system to U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Network and Australian air defense radars, creating a multinational sensor web that covers the entire Western Pacific. A Chinese bomber taking off from Hainan Island is now tracked by Australian radar, identified by Japanese satellites, and engaged, if necessary, by missiles launched from U.S. or Japanese platforms hundreds of miles away. China's air power advantage just got compressed. Japan operates 17 volts, 22 Osprey tiltrotor aircraft, purchased from the United States and modified for Japanese operational requirements, that can carry 24 combat-equipped troops 900 miles at 280 miles per hour. That's twice the speed and 3 times the range of conventional helicopters, which means Japan can now reinforce contested islands in the Ryukyu chain faster than China can project power from the mainland. Here's the tactical breakthrough. In a crisis scenario where Chinese forces attempt to seize an uninhabited island, a gray zone tactic Beijing has rehearsed repeatedly, Japan can put boots on the ground within 2 hours, turning a political incident into a defended position before international diplomacy even mobilizes. Chinese planners now face a choice: back down or escalate against Japanese troops on sovereign territory, which triggers alliance obligations with the United States. The Osprey isn't a weapons platform, it's a strategic signaling tool wrapped in rotors and wings, and Japan uses it that way, conducting highly publicized island defense drills every quarter, often with U.S. Marine participation. China watches every exercise. In March 2024, Japan established its first dedicated defensive cyber operations unit within the Self-Defense Force, tasked with protecting military networks and, critically, conducting counter-cyber operations against adversaries attempting to infiltrate Japanese command system. This is Japan's answer to China's Strategic Support Force, the PLA unit responsible for cyber attacks, electronic warfare, and space operations. Japan's cyber unit operates under strict legal constraints. It can defend networks and disrupt ongoing attacks, but cannot launch preemptive offensive operations. However, the line between defense and offense in cyberspace is thin. Disrupting an adversary's attack often requires penetrating their command infrastructure. Japan won't discuss operational details publicly, but wargame projections suggest that even limited defensive cyber capabilities can degrade Chinese targeting networks enough to matter in the opening hours of a conflict. If Chinese reconnaissance satellites can't relay data to missile batteries, or if fire control radars experience intermittent outages, the entire precision strike apparatus slows down. And in modern warfare, slowing your adversary's kill chain by even 15 minutes can determine who controls the battle space. So, can Japan's 8 new systems create enough strategic ambiguity to deter Chinese aggression without triggering an arms race spiral? The answer is yes, but with a critical caveat. Japan isn't trying to defeat China militarily. It's making any Chinese move so costly, so uncertain, and so dependent on escalation that Beijing has to reconsider whether the objective is worth the price. Here's what you need to remember. First, Japan turned geography into weaponry. Submarines, island-based missiles, and helicopter swarms exploit the East China Sea's natural choke points, forcing Chinese forces into predictable corridors where they're vulnerable. Second, Japan built redundancy and resilience. Networked systems, distributed command, and allied integration mean there's no single node China can destroy to collapse Japanese defense. Third, Japan weaponized time. Rapid response forces, long-endurance submarines, and standoff missiles compress Chinese decision-making window, making surprise attacks harder to execute. The question now isn't whether Japan can slow a Chinese offensive. It clearly can. The question is whether China will adapt its doctrine faster than Japan can deploy the next generation of system. And what happens next will determine whether the Indo-Pacific remains contested or tilts toward a new military equilibrium.